The wagon didn't even slow down. Rowena Mercer hit the Wyoming dirt hard, her trunk crashing beside her, dust clouding the air as the only family she'd ever known disappeared over the ridge. 29 years old, too plain, too heavy, too much. That's what her father's letter said when the ranch owner found it tucked inside her belongings. Sent west to vanish, promised to a stranger who wanted someone else. The man staring down at her now, Caleb Ashford, looked like he'd been punched in the gut. His foreman was already laughing. She had 12 days before they'd send her back to nothing. But Rowena Mercer didn't know how to quit. If you want to see how a woman everyone underestimated brought an entire frontier ranch to its knees, stay until the end. Drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The Wyoming Sun was a bastard. Rowena had learned that in the first 5 minutes of lying face down in the dirt, her palms scraped raw, her dress torn at the hem where it had caught on the wagon wheel during the fall. The Sun didn't care that she'd been thrown from a moving carriage by her own brother-in-law, didn't care that her ribs ached or that her hair had come loose from its pins and now stuck to her neck in sweaty tangles. The Sun just kept beating down, indifferent and cruel, like everything else in her life. She pushed herself up slowly, tasting dust and blood where she'd bitten her lip. Her trunk lay on its side a few feet away, the latch broken, her few possessions spilling into the dirt. A cotton nightgown, a hairbrush with half the bristles missing, 3 books she'd read so many times the spines had cracked. That was it. That was everything she owned. The sound of boots on hard-packed earth made her look up. 3 men stood in a loose semicircle, backlit by the afternoon glare. She couldn't make out their faces clearly, but she could feel their stares. The weight of their judgment pressed down harder than the sun. The one in the middle stepped forward, tall, broad-shouldered, maybe 35. Dark hair, darker expression. His shirt was rolled to the elbows, his hands calloused and stained with what looked like axle grease. This, Rowena understood with a sinking certainty, was Caleb Ashford, the man who'd been exchanging letters with her sister for 6 months. The man who'd agreed to marry a pretty young woman of 23, not a worn-out spinster pushing 30. "You're not Vivian," he said. His voice was flat, stating fact. Rowena got to her feet, brushing uselessly at her skirt. "No." "Where is she?" "Home, in Philadelphia." Rowena met his eyes, though it cost her. She'd gotten good at that over the years, looking directly at people who didn't want to see her. "She changed her mind about coming west. My father thought you might accept me instead." The man to Caleb's left, older, grizzled, with a scar splitting his upper lip, made a sound that might have been a laugh or a cough. "Accept you? Lady, you got some nerve showing up here like this." "I didn't have much choice," Rowena said. "They didn't exactly ask my opinion." The third man hadn't spoken yet. He stood slightly apart from the others, arms crossed, studying her with cold calculation. Younger than Caleb, maybe late 20s, with sharp features and pale eyes that reminded Rowena of winter ice. Something about him made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. "This is a problem," he said quietly. Caleb shot him a look. "I can see that, Darius." So that was Darius Crow, the foreman. Rowena had learned his name from Vivian's letters, the ones Vivian had let her read back when they'd both thought Rowena might be useful for advice on how to charm a rancher. Vivian had mentioned Darius in passing, Caleb's right-hand man, runs the day-to-day operations. A bit intense. Intense. That was one word for the way he was looking at her now, like she was a coyote that had wandered into the chicken coop. "Did your father send a letter?" Caleb asked. "Explaining this?" Rowena hesitated. She'd seen her father slip something into her trunk the night before they'd left Philadelphia, but she hadn't dared look. Hadn't wanted to know what excuse he'd written, what lies he'd told to make this betrayal easier to stomach. "I don't know," she said. Caleb's jaw tightened. He looked past her toward the horizon where the wagon had disappeared, as if considering whether to chase it down and demand answers. But they all knew the wagon wasn't coming back. Her brother-in-law had made that clear when he'd shoved her toward the edge of the seat, had practically kicked her trunk after her. "Your father said to leave her here and don't look back," he'd said. Said Ashford would handle it. Handle it. Handle her. Like she was a piece of unwanted furniture. "Well, Caleb said finally, "I suppose you'd better come inside." It wasn't an invitation, it was resignation. The ranch house was smaller than Rowena had expected, but solidly built. Logs chinked with mud and moss, a stone chimney, windows with actual glass instead of oiled paper. The yard around it was hard-packed dirt, with a few struggling patches of grass near a water pump. To the left stood a barn, its doors hanging crooked. To the right, a bunkhouse and what looked like a chicken coop, though she couldn't hear any chickens. Darius and the older man, whose name, she learned, was Frank, peeled off toward the barn without another word. Caleb led her up the porch steps, which creaked under their weight. The door stuck when he pushed it, swollen from humidity or age. Inside was dim and close, one main room serving as kitchen and living space, with a stone fireplace taking up most of the far wall, a rough-hewn table with mismatched chairs, shelves holding tin plates and cups, a door to the left that probably led to a bedroom, everything covered in a fine layer of dust. "You live here alone?" Rowena asked. "The men bunk outside. I keep a woman from town who comes twice a week to cook and clean, but she hasn't been here in a while." Caleb moved to the table, shoving aside a stack of papers. "Wait here." He disappeared through the side door. Rowena heard the sound of drawers opening and closing, the rustle of paper. She stood in the middle of the room, hands clasped in front of her, trying not to look at the dirty dishes piled by the wash basin or the cobwebs strung across the ceiling beams. When Caleb returned, he was holding a letter. The paper was creased and worn like it had been read many times. He thrust it toward her without ceremony. "This came with your trunk." Rowena took it with trembling fingers. Her father's handwriting. She recognized it immediately, the same hand that had written her out of the family ledger when she'd turned 25 unmarried, the same hand that had signed away her mother's jewelry to Vivian on her wedding day. She unfolded the letter. "Ashford. By now you've met Rowena. I apologize for the deception, but circumstances have changed. Vivian has made a more suitable match here in Philadelphia, a banker's son with good prospects. I trust you understand that I could not refuse such an opportunity for my youngest daughter. Rowena is 29, unmarried, and has become a burden I can no longer afford to maintain. She is healthy, literate, and capable of housework. If you cannot find use for her as a wife, perhaps you might employ her in some other capacity. I leave the matter to your discretion. I have enclosed no funds for her return passage, as I do not wish her to return. Regards, Edmund Mercer." The letter shook in Rowena's hands. She read it twice, then a third time, waiting for the words to change. They didn't. "A burden I can no longer afford to maintain. I do not wish her to return." The room tilted slightly. Rowena locked her knees, forcing herself to stay upright. She would not faint, would not give Caleb Ashford the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. "Well," she said, her voice coming out steadier than she'd expected. "That's clear enough." Caleb was watching her carefully. "You didn't know." "I knew I wasn't wanted. I didn't know I'd been sold like old furniture." She folded the letter precisely, creasing the edges with deliberate care, and handed it back. "What do you want me to do?" "Do?" "Yes. Do you want me to leave, try to find work in town? I have no money, but I can—" She stopped. She could what? Sew? Cook? Clean? She'd kept house for her father for years, but those weren't skills anyone paid for out here. Women who came west were wives or whores, and she clearly wasn't pretty enough for either profession. Caleb scrubbed a hand over his face. He looked tired, more than tired, defeated. "Town's 2 days' ride. You wouldn't make it on foot, and I'm not wasting a horse on you. Then what?" "I don't know." He dropped into one of the chairs, the wood groaning under his weight. "I need to think." Rowena stood there, waiting. Outside, she could hear men's voices, the clang of metal on metal, the sounds of a working ranch, a place that didn't need her, didn't want her, couldn't figure out what to do with her. Finally, Caleb looked up. 12 days. "What?" "I've got a cattle drive in 12 days, taking the herd to market in Cheyenne. After that, I'll have money to pay for stage passage. You can go to wherever, somewhere. But until then, you're stuck here, and I don't have time to deal with you." 12 days. Less than 2 weeks to figure out where a woman with no money, no prospects, and no family went when even the frontier didn't want her. "All right," Rowena said. "There's a spare room off the kitchen. Used to be storage. You can sleep there. Mrs. Calloway, the woman who cooks. She hasn't shown up in 3 weeks. If you want to earn your keep, you can handle meals. The men eat breakfast at dawn, dinner at noon, supper at sundown." "How many men?" 8, counting me and Darius. 8 men. 3 meals a day. 12 days. Rowena did the math automatically. 288 meals. She'd cooked for her father and sister for years, but never on this scale. Do you have supplies? She asked. Caleb barked a laugh. Supplies, right. There's a root cellar out back, some dry goods in the pantry. Make do with what's there. And if there's not enough, then I guess you get creative. He stood, clearly done with the conversation. I've got work to do. Don't touch anything you're not supposed to. He left her standing in the dusty kitchen, the door slamming behind him. Rowena looked around the room. Dirty dishes, cobwebs, a floor that hadn't been swept in weeks, a stove that looked like it hadn't been cleaned in months. 12 days to prove she was worth the trouble of keeping alive. She rolled up her sleeves and got to work. The root cellar was worse than she'd expected. Rowena stood at the bottom of the ladder, holding a kerosene lamp, staring at rows of rotting vegetables and rusted tins, potatoes sprouting eyes like tiny fingers, onions gone soft and reeking, a barrel of flour with weevils crawling through it. Someone had been storing food down here and then forgetting about it, letting it spoil while the ranch hands went hungry or ate whatever slop they could scrape together. She climbed back up, her skirt catching on the ladder rungs, and found the pantry in similar condition. Beans that looked old enough to vote. Hardtack so stale it could double as roofing shingles. A few tins of peaches with labels too faded to read the dates. This wasn't just neglect. This was chaos. Rowena stood in the kitchen, hands on her hips, and started making lists in her head. What could be salvaged? What needed to be thrown out? What she'd need to make 8 men's meals for 12 days from what amounted to scraps and prayer. She was elbow deep in washing dishes when the door banged open. The kid who walked in couldn't have been more than 12, all knobby elbows and big ears. He stopped short when he saw her, eyes going wide. "Who are you?" he asked. "Rowena Mercer. Who are you?" "Toby Reed." He crept closer, curiosity overcoming caution. "You the lady Mr. Ashford was supposed to marry?" "No, that would be my sister. I'm the consolation prize." Toby frowned, working through that. "You gonna cook?" "Apparently." "Good. Frank's cooking tastes like boot leather." Despite herself, Rowena smiled. "I'll try to do better than boot leather." "You know how to make biscuits?" "Yes." "Real ones? Not the kind that break your teeth?" "Real ones." Toby's whole face lit up. "Can you make some now?" Rowena glanced at the disaster of the kitchen, the pile of dishes still waiting, the stove that needed blacking. "I'll make them for breakfast tomorrow, but you can help me finish cleaning up if you want." She'd expected him to bolt. Instead, Toby grabbed a rag and started drying dishes. "Why you helping?" she asked. He shrugged. "Ain't got nothing else to do. Mr. Ashford gave me the afternoon off 'cause I fixed the gate hinge." They worked in silence for a while. Toby wasn't particularly good at drying dishes. He kept leaving water spots, but he was company. The first person since she'd arrived who hadn't looked at her like a problem to be solved. "How long you been working here?" Rowena asked. "Since spring. My ma died last winter. Fever. Mr. Ashford said I could work for room and board till I'm old enough to draw wages. That was kind of him. He's all right, better than some." Toby paused. "Darius scares me, though." "The foreman?" "Yeah, he's got a mean streak. Hit one of the horses so hard last week it went lame. Mr. Ashford was mad about it, but he didn't do nothing, just told Darius to be more careful." Rowena filed that information away. "Where do you sleep?" "Bunkhouse, with the other men." "They treat you all right?" "Mostly. Frank's okay. Some of the others—" He trailed off, shrugging again. Rowena finished the last dish and surveyed the kitchen. It still looked rough, but at least it was clean. She'd need to scrub the stove tomorrow, black it properly, and someone needed to fix that door so it didn't stick. "Toby," she said, "how much do you know about the ranch, the day-to-day operations?" He gave her a wary look. "Some." "Why?" "Because I need to understand what I'm working with if I'm going to feed everyone properly." "How often do supplies come in? Where's the nearest town? Who handles the money?" "Mr. Ashford handles money. Or supposed to. Darius actually does most of it." Toby shifted his weight. "Town's 2 days northeast. Supply wagon comes once a month, but it didn't come last month. Mr. Ashford said we couldn't afford it. Couldn't afford supplies, but he was planning a cattle drive. Those two facts didn't sit well together. When's the last time the ranch sold cattle? Rowena asked. Dunno. Before I got here, I think. 6 months then. Maybe more. No wonder everything was falling apart. The door opened again and Frank stuck his head in. He looked at Rowena, then at the clean kitchen, then back at Rowena. Huh, he said. You actually gonna earn your keep? I'm going to try. Well, supper's usually at sundown. You need help with anything, Toby knows where things are. He started to leave, then paused. We ain't had a woman around here in a while. Just watch yourself, all right? Some of the men got rough manners. It wasn't quite a warning, but it wasn't quite friendly advice either. Rowena nodded. Frank left. Toby finished drying the last cup and set it carefully on the shelf. I should go, he said. Got evening chores. Thank you for helping. He ducked his head, embarrassed, and scurried out. Rowena stood alone in the kitchen as the lights started to fade outside. Through the window, she could see men moving around the yard, the clink of harnesses, the low of cattle somewhere in the distance. A ranch running on fumes and stubbornness, held together by a man who looked like he hadn't slept in weeks, and a foreman who scared 12-year-old boys. 12 days, Caleb had said. 12 days until he put her on a stage to nowhere. Rowena looked at the clean kitchen, at the pantry with its pathetic supplies, at the stove waiting to be fired up for supper. If she only had 12 days, she was going to make them count. The men came in for supper like a herd of something barely domesticated. Rowena had done what she could with what she had: beans and salt pork, hardtack softened in the bean water, coffee strong enough to strip paint. Not fancy, but hot and filling. She'd set the table as best she could with mismatched tin plates and bent forks, had even found half a loaf of bread that wasn't moldy, and sliced it thin to make it stretch. They filed in one by one, tracking mud and manure, smelling of sweat and horses. Frank came first, nodding at her but not speaking. Then 3 younger men she didn't know, ranch hands with weathered faces and suspicious eyes. They looked at her like she was a stray dog that might bite. Caleb came in next, with Darius right behind him. Sit, Caleb said, dropping into the chair at the head of the table. The men sat. Rowena served, ladling beans onto plates, passing the bread. No one thanked her. They just started eating, hunched over their food like someone might steal it. Rowena took a plate for herself and sat at the far end of the table, the only chair left. She could feel them looking at her between bites, assessing, judging. One of the younger men, blond with a patchy beard, spoke around a mouthful of beans. So you're the sister. Yes. The one nobody wanted. Rowena set down her fork carefully. That's right. Huh. He grinned, showing teeth stained with tobacco. Guess I can see why. Frank kicked him under the table. Shut up, Billy. What? I'm just saying. I said shut up. Billy subsided, but the grin didn't leave his face. Rowena picked up her fork and kept eating. The beans were bland and the salt pork was tough, but at least it was food. Darius hadn't touched his plate. He was watching her with that same cold calculation she'd seen earlier. Where'd you learn to cook? He asked. At home. I kept house for my father. And he still got rid of you. Darius tilted his head. Must have been bad at it. Must have, Rowena agreed pleasantly. Caleb shot Darius a look. That's enough. Just making conversation. Darius finally picked up his fork, pushing beans around his plate. We ought to talk about what happens when you leave. Can't spare the men to escort you to town. Gonna have to send her on the supply wagon when it comes through. Supply wagon's not coming, Caleb said. Not till after the drive. Then what? I'll figure it out. 12 days doesn't leave much time for figuring. Darius leaned back in his chair. Unless you're thinking of keeping her. The table went quiet. Even Billy stopped eating. Caleb's jaw tightened. I'm not thinking anything right now except getting through the next 2 weeks. After that, we'll see. Fair enough. Darius stood, leaving his plate half full. I'll be in the barn checking the tack. We lost another bridle today. Lost or broke? Lost. 3rd one this month. Caleb swore under his breath. We don't have money for new tack. Then I guess we'll make do. Darius headed for the door, pausing to look back at Rowena. Thanks for supper. Better than Frank's slop, anyway. He left. The tension in the room eased slightly. Rowena finished her beans and started collecting plates. The men stood, leaving their dishes where they were,
filing out without a word. Only Frank carried his plate to the wash basin. "You did all right," he said quietly. "Don't let Darius get to you. He's got a burr up his ass about most things."
I noticed. Just be careful around him. Frank glanced toward the door, then back at her. He don't like complications, and you're definitely a complication. He left before she could ask what he meant. Rowena washed dishes in silence, her hands red and raw by the time she finished. Through the window, she could see lamplight in the barn, voices drifting across the yard. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. She dried the last plate and put it away, then checked the stove. The fire had burned down to coals. She'd need to restart it in the morning for breakfast. More beans, probably. Maybe she could make those biscuits for Toby. The spare room Caleb had mentioned was barely bigger than a closet. A narrow cot, a wooden crate for a table, a single shelf. But the window had a latch that worked, and someone had left a clean blanket folded on the bed. Rowena unpacked her trunk by lamplight. 3 dresses, all of them practical and worn, the nightgown, the books, the hairbrush. At the bottom, wrapped in her mother's shawl, was the only thing of value she owned, a small sewing kit with good scissors and real steel needles. She changed into her nightgown and braided her hair, then sat on the edge of the cot with her mother's shawl in her lap. "A burden I can no longer afford to maintain." The words echoed in her head. She'd read them so many times today they'd lost some of their sting, but the weight of them remained. Her father had sent her away to die, basically. Or to disappear, which was the same thing. No money, no prospects, no way home. 12 days. Rowena folded the shawl and set it on the shelf. Then she blew out the lamp and lay down in the dark, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling in for the night. Tomorrow, she thought. Tomorrow she'd start figuring out what was really wrong with this place. Because something was wrong, she could feel it. The missing supplies, the lost tack, the ranch owner who couldn't afford to feed his men but was planning a cattle drive. If she only had 12 days, she needed to understand what she was up against. And maybe, if she was smart enough and stubborn enough, she could find a way to make herself indispensable. It was the only plan she had. Rowena woke before dawn to the sound of roosters that didn't exist and men who did. She dressed quickly in the dark, pinning up her hair by feel, and made her way to the kitchen. The stove was cold. She got it lit with kindling from the box by the hearth, blessing whoever had thought to keep it stocked, and set water to boil for coffee. While the stove heated, she took stock of what she had to work with. The flour was still full of weevils, but she picked through it carefully, sifting out the worst of the bugs. Not ideal, but she'd seen worse. The beans needed soaking overnight, which she should have thought of yesterday. The salt pork was nearly gone. She found a jar of lard, half a tin of baking powder, and some salt that had clumped together from moisture. Biscuits, then. And coffee. That would have to do. She mixed the dough quickly, her hands remembering the rhythm even if her brain was still half asleep. Cut them out with the rim of a tin cup since there was no biscuit cutter. Got them in the oven just as the first gray light started seeping through the windows. The coffee boiled over while she was checking the biscuits. She swore, something she rarely did, and yanked the pot off the heat, slopping hot coffee across the stovetop. It hissed and steamed, filling the kitchen with a burnt smell. Rough morning? Rowena spun around. Caleb stood in the doorway, already dressed for work, watching her with something that might have been amusement. "The coffee boiled over," she said unnecessarily. "I can see that." He crossed to the stove, picking up the pot with a rag, and pouring himself a cup despite the burnt smell. He took a sip, grimaced, and took another. "Still better than Frank's. That's a low bar."
"Yeah, it is." He leaned against the counter, studying her. "You didn't have to get up this early. You said breakfast at dawn. I also said you could sleep in that closet until I figured out what to do with you. Didn't say you had to work for it." Rowena turned back to the stove, checking the biscuits. Almost ready. "I'm not much good at sitting still," I noticed. They stood in silence while the biscuits finished baking. Rowena could feel him watching her, could feel the weight of questions he wasn't asking. Finally, she couldn't stand it anymore. "What?" she said. "Just wondering what your plan is." "My plan?" "Yeah, you got one? Or are you just cooking biscuits and hoping something works out?" Rowena pulled the biscuits from the oven and set them on the table to cool. They looked good, golden brown, risen properly.
Toby would be happy. I don't have a plan, she said. I have 12 days. I figured I'd use them. Use them how? I don't know yet. She poured herself coffee, blowing on it to cool it. But I'm good at figuring things out, always have been. And this place? She gestured around the kitchen. This place needs figuring out. Caleb's expression shifted. Not quite defensive, but close. What's that supposed to mean? It means your root cellar is full of rotten vegetables and your pantry's full of weevils. It means you've lost 3 bridles in a month and your supply wagon didn't show up and you're planning a cattle drive when you can't afford to feed your men properly. She met his eyes. It means something's wrong here, and you're either too busy to notice or too tired to care. She expected him to get angry, to throw her out. Instead, he just looked at her for a long moment, then laughed, a short, bitter sound. You got all that from one night? I've got eyes. Huh. He drained his coffee and set the cup down. Well, you're not wrong, but it's not your problem. Maybe not, but I'm here for 12 days anyway. Might as well make myself useful. The door banged open and men started filing in for breakfast. Toby came first, eyes lighting up when he saw the biscuits. Frank followed, nodding approvingly. Then the others, Billy with his mocking grin, 2 men she still didn't know, and finally Darius, looking like he hadn't slept. Rowena served biscuits and coffee, then stepped back to watch them eat. The biscuits disappeared in minutes. Toby ate 3. Even Billy looked grudgingly satisfied. Darius ate 1 biscuit slowly, chewing like he was testing for poison. Not bad, he said finally. Thank you. Mrs. Calloway used to make biscuits before she stopped coming. He looked at Caleb. You ever figure out why she quit? Said she wasn't getting paid regular enough. And were you? Paying her regular? Caleb's jaw tightened. I paid her what I could when I could. Right. Darius stood, brushing crumbs off his shirt. Well, now we got a new cook. One who works for free. Lucky us. He walked out. Rowena collected plates in silence. The other men left one by one until only Frank and Toby remained. Don't mind Darius, Frank said. He's always pissy in the morning. He's pissy all the time, Toby muttered. Frank cuffed him lightly on the ear. Watch your mouth. Now get to the barn. Those stalls won't muck themselves. Toby scrambled out. Frank lingered, turning his cup in his hands. You meant what you said? He asked. About figuring things out? Yes. Then start with the books. The books? Account ledgers. Mr. Ashford keeps them in his office, that little room off the main bedroom. If you want to know what's wrong with this place, that's where you'll find it. Frank set his cup down carefully. But be careful. Darius handles most of the accounts now. He don't like people poking around in his business. Why are you telling me this? Frank shrugged. Because something's been off for months, and Mr. Ashford's too stubborn to see it. Maybe a fresh pair of eyes will catch what he's missing. He headed for the door, then paused. Or maybe you'll just get yourself in trouble. Either way, I figure you got a right to know what you're walking into. He left. Rowena stood in the empty kitchen, surrounded by dirty dishes and the smell of burnt coffee. The books. She looked toward Caleb's bedroom door. Closed. He was probably out in the yard by now, working. She could hear voices outside, the sound of horses being led from the barn. It would be wrong to snoop through his private papers, wrong to go into his room without permission, but Frank had basically invited her to look. And if something was wrong with the ranch's accounts, if money was disappearing or being mismanaged, then Caleb had a right to know. And if Rowena could be the one to figure it out. She dried her hands on her apron and walked to the bedroom door. It opened with a creak. The room beyond was small and spare, a bed with a quilt that had seen better days, a trunk at the foot of the bed, a washstand with a cracked mirror, and in the corner a small desk piled high with papers. Rowena crossed to the desk, her heart hammering. The ledgers were right on top, 3 of them, leather-bound, the most recent one still open to a half-finished page. She picked it up carefully, carrying it to the window where the light was better. The entries were written in 2 different hands, one neat and precise, probably Caleb's. The other sloppier, harder to read. Darius's, she guessed. She started reading. Cattle sales. Feed purchases. Wages paid to the men. Repairs to equipment. It all looked normal at first glance. But as she went back through the months, she started to notice inconsistencies. A payment for lumber that had no corresponding repair noted anywhere. A cattle sale that brought in less money than it should have based on the head count. Multiple entries for miscellaneous supplies with no details. And then 3 months back, a large withdrawal marked simply operating expenses, DC. DC. Darius Crow. Rowena flipped back further. More withdrawals, more vague entries, small amounts at first, then larger ones. Always initial DC. She was so focused on the ledger that she didn't hear footsteps until the door opened behind her. She spun around. Darius stood in the doorway, blocking the light. "Looking for something?" he asked softly. Rowena's fingers tightened on the ledger. She didn't move from the window, didn't try to hide what she was doing. There was no point. Darius had caught her red-handed. "I'm reading," she said. "I can see that." Darius stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. The click of the latch sounded very loud in the small space. "Question is why?" "Frank suggested I take a look at the accounts. Said something's been off." "Frank talks too much." Darius crossed his arms. "Those ledgers are ranch business, not yours." "Maybe not. But I'm the one cooking your meals and cleaning your kitchen, and I'd like to know if I'm working for a ranch that's actually going to survive the next month, or if I'm wasting my time." It was a gamble saying it that way. Aggressive instead of apologetic. But Rowena had learned long ago that apologizing just made men think they had the right to keep pushing. Darius studied her for a long moment. His pale eyes were unreadable. "What did you find?" he asked finally. "Inconsistencies. Money going out that doesn't match what's coming in, payments marked as operating expenses with no details." She held up the ledger. "This withdrawal here, 3 months ago, $500. What was it for?" "Supplies." "What kind of supplies?" "Feed, lumber, nails, things we needed." "Then why isn't it itemized? Every other supply purchase in this ledger has a list of what was bought and where. This one just says operating expenses." Darius's jaw tightened. "I was in a hurry when I wrote it, didn't have time to break it down. And this one?" Rowena flipped back a few pages. $200, same notation, and this one, $300, all within the last 6 months, all marked the same way. "What exactly are you accusing me of?" "I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm asking questions." "Sounds like accusing to me." Darius took a step closer. He was taller than her by half a foot, broader through the shoulders. The small room suddenly felt very cramped. "You've been here one day. You don't know how this ranch runs. You don't know what I do to keep this place from falling apart while Caleb drinks himself stupid every night." Rowena kept her voice level. "If that's true, then these ledgers should prove it. Show me the receipts for those purchases. Show me where the supplies went. That's all I'm asking." "I don't have to show you anything." "No, you don't. But you'll have to show Caleb eventually." She closed the ledger and held it against her chest. "And if there's nothing wrong, then there's no reason to get defensive about it." For a moment, she thought he might grab the ledger from her. His hands flexed at his sides and something dangerous flickered across his face. Then footsteps sounded outside, and voices, Caleb's voice, calling orders to someone in the yard. Darius stepped back. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly, "poking around in things you don't understand. This ranch has problems, yeah, but they're not the kind that get solved by some spinster playing detective." He left before she could respond, brushing past her close enough that she could smell horse sweat and tobacco on his clothes. Rowena stood there, clutching the ledger, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Her hands were shaking. She set the ledger down on the desk and pressed her palms flat against the wood, forcing them to steady. Frank had been right. Something was off. And Darius knew it. The question was whether Caleb knew it too. She heard the bedroom door open in the main room. Caleb must have come back inside. She grabbed the ledger and walked out before she could lose her nerve. Caleb was at the wash basin, scrubbing dirt from his hands. He looked up when she entered, his eyes going to the ledger. "What are you doing with that?" he asked. "Reading it. Frank said I should." "Frank needs to mind his own business." "Maybe. But he's not wrong." Rowena set the ledger on the table. "When was the last time you went through these accounts yourself? Actually sat down and checked the numbers?" Caleb dried his hands on a rag, his jaw tight. "I don't have time to sit around doing bookkeeping. That's why Darius handles it." "And you trust him?" "He's been my foreman for 3 years. Yeah, I trust him." Then you won't mind looking at these entries with me."
Rowena opened the ledger to the page she'd marked. Here, $500. 3 months ago. Operating expenses. Do you remember what that was for? Caleb glanced at the page. Supplies, probably. That's what Darius said. But there's no itemization. Every other supply purchase has details. Where it was bought, what was included, who sold it. This one doesn't. So Darius was in a hurry when he wrote it down. So what? So there are 6 more entries just like it, all in the last 6 months, all for large amounts, all with no details. She flipped through the pages, showing him. Add them up, and you're looking at over $2,000 with nothing to show where it went. Caleb's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. He pulled the ledger closer, studying the entries.
Could be legitimate, he said finally. We've had a lot of emergency repairs, fence wire, new pump parts. The barn roof needed patching. Then where are the receipts? Darius keeps them. Where? I don't know. His bunk, probably, or the office in the barn. Caleb looked up at her. What are you trying to say? That Darius is stealing from me? I'm saying the numbers don't add up, and when I asked him about it, he got defensive instead of explaining. Caleb slammed the ledger shut. You've been here one day, and you think you know my foreman better than I do? I think I know accounting, and I know when something doesn't make sense. Darius has been keeping this ranch running while Caleb stopped himself, scrubbing a hand over his face. While I've been dealing with other things, he's earned the benefit of the doubt. And what have I earned? You? Caleb laughed, but there was no humor in it. You earned 12 days of room and board. That's it. You don't get to come in here and start making accusations. Rowena felt something hot and sharp rise in her chest. Anger, maybe. Or just the accumulated weight of a lifetime of being dismissed. Fine, she said. Then I'll keep my mouth shut and cook your meals and leave in 12 days. And when this ranch goes under because someone's bleeding you dry, you can tell yourself it's not my problem. She turned to leave, but Caleb's voice stopped her. Wait. She looked back. He was staring at the ledger, his jaw working. I'll talk to Darius, he said quietly. Ask him about the receipts, but I'm not making any promises. If he says it's legitimate, that's good enough for me. It wasn't what Rowena wanted to hear, but it was something. All right, she said. She went back to the kitchen and started cleaning up from breakfast, her hands working automatically while her mind spun. Darius had been stealing, she was almost certain of it. The defensive reaction, the vague entries, the way he tried to intimidate her into backing off. It all pointed to guilt, but proving it was another matter, especially if Caleb was determined to trust his foreman over a woman he'd known for less than 24 hours. The door opened and Toby slipped in, looking nervous. Miss Rowena? He said. Can I ask you something? Of course. He glanced toward the door, making sure they were alone. Is it true you were looking at the ranch books? Word traveled fast, apparently. Who told you that? I heard Darius talking to Billy. He said you were poking around where you shouldn't be. Toby twisted his hands together. Are you trying to help Mr. Ashford, or are you going to make trouble? Rowena set down the plate she'd been drying. I'm trying to help, but I might make trouble in the process. That bother you? No, ma'am, just... He looked down at his feet. Just be careful. Darius don't like people crossing him. Last year, one of the ranch hands tried to complain about short wages. Darius got him fired. Did the wages get fixed? No, ma'am. Rowena filed that away, too. Toby, how much do you know about the cattle? The ones Mr. Ashford's planning to drive to market? Some. I help with the branding and tagging. Why? How many head are we talking about? Toby thought for a moment. Last count was around 300, give or take. And when was that count done? 2 weeks ago, maybe? Darius and Mr. Ashford rode out to check the herd. 300 head. Rowena did quick math in her head. Even at low market prices, that should bring in enough money to keep the ranch running for at least a year. Maybe longer if they were careful. So why was Caleb acting like he was barely scraping by? Toby, she said slowly. Has the herd gotten smaller recently? Any cattle go missing? His face went carefully blank. Sometimes we lose a few to predators, wolves and such. How many is a few? I don't know, ma'am. You'd have to ask Darius. He keeps track of that stuff. Of course he did. The door banged open and Frank stuck his head in. Toby, you in here shirking? No, sir. Just get your skinny ass to the corral. We got a horse with a loose shoe needs holding. Toby scurried out. Frank gave Rowena a long look. Heard you had an interesting morning, he said. News travels? Small ranch. Not much else to talk about. He stepped inside, lowering his voice. Did you find what I thought you'd find? Inconsistencies. Large withdrawals with no documentation, but Caleb doesn't want to believe it. Frank grunted. Darius has him snowed. Has for months. Man's good at his job when he wants to be, and Caleb's too buried in his own problems to look close. What problems? Frank hesitated, then shook his head. Not my story to tell, but let's just say Caleb's got reasons for drinking that don't have nothing to do with the ranch. He turned to leave, then paused. You planning to keep digging? I don't know. Depends on whether I want to get thrown out early or wait the full 12 days. For what it's worth, I think you should keep digging. This place needs someone who gives a damn, even if she's only here temporary. He tipped his hat. Just watch your back. Darius plays rough when he's cornered. He left her alone again. Rowena spent the rest of the morning working through the kitchen, taking inventory of what was actually usable and what needed to be thrown out. The list of things to throw out was depressingly long. By the time she finished, she had maybe enough food to last another week if she stretched it. That was a problem. A bigger problem than the missing money, at least in the short term. Because men who didn't eat didn't work. And men who didn't work didn't earn. She was pulling out potatoes to salvage what she could when she heard raised voices outside. Caleb and Darius, arguing. Rowena moved to the window. They were standing near the barn, both men tense. She couldn't hear everything they were saying, but she caught enough. Just show me the receipts and this whole thing goes away. Told you, I don't have time for this right now. $2,000, Darius. That's not nothing. Running this ranch while you drink yourself into the ground. The argument cut off abruptly. Caleb grabbed Darius by the front of his shirt, yanking him close. For a moment, Rowena thought they might actually come to blows. Then Caleb shoved him back and stalked away toward the house. Darius stood there for a moment, staring after him. Even from a distance, Rowena could see the cold fury on his face. Then he turned and looked directly at the kitchen window. Directly at her. Rowena stepped back from the glass, her pulse jumping. But it was too late. He'd seen her watching. She forced herself to turn back to the potatoes, to keep working like nothing had happened. But her hands were shaking again, and this time they wouldn't stop. Caleb came in a few minutes later, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the dishes. You were right, he said without preamble. He doesn't have the receipts. Rowena set down her paring knife. What did he say? That he threw them out. Said he didn't think we needed to keep every scrap of paper cluttering up the place. Caleb paced across the small kitchen. Could be true. Darius isn't exactly organized. Or he's lying. Or he's lying. Caleb stopped pacing and looked at her. I told him I want a full accounting of every dollar that went out in the last 6 months, line by line. He's got 3 days to produce it. And if he doesn't, then we'll figure it out. He didn't sound convinced. Look, I know you think you're helping, and maybe you are, but Darius is right about one thing. You don't know how this ranch works. You don't know what I've been dealing with. Then tell me. Why? You're leaving in 11 days. What's the point? Rowena met his eyes. The point is that I'm here now, and for whatever reason, I seem to be the only person willing to ask the questions everyone else is avoiding. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. 3 years ago, he said, I had twice as many cattle and enough money to hire on 10 men. I was making plans to expand, maybe buy the property next door. Then my wife died. Rowena went still. She hadn't known he'd been married. Fever took her, Caleb continued, staring at his hands. 1 week she was fine, the next she was gone. After that, He trailed off. I stopped paying attention to things. Let Darius take over more and more of the day-to-day operations. Figured he'd keep things running while I got my head straight. And did you? Get your head straight? I'm working on it. He looked up at her. Point is, I trusted Darius because I didn't have the energy to do it myself. And maybe that was a mistake. But firing him now, right before a cattle drive that could save this ranch, that's not a mistake I can afford to make. Rowena understood what he wasn't saying. He needed Darius, even if Darius was stealing from him. Because without the foreman, the drive would fall apart. And without the drive, the ranch would fold anyway. What if there was another way? She asked. Another way to what? To handle the drive, to keep the ranch running.
What if you didn't need Darius as much as you think you do? Caleb laughed bitterly. No offense, but you don't know the first thing about running a cattle drive.
No, but I know accounting, and I know management, and I'm good at figuring out systems. She leaned forward. Give me access to all the records, not just the ledgers, but the cattle counts, the supply lists, everything. Let me map out what's actually going on here. Maybe I'll find something that helps. And maybe you'll just waste time we don't have. What's the alternative? Trust Darius and hope he's not lying? Hope the drive goes well and the money somehow appears? Caleb rubbed his temples. He looked exhausted. You realize if you're wrong about this, you'll have caused a lot of trouble for nothing. I know, but I don't think I'm wrong. He studied her for a long moment. Then he stood and went to his bedroom, returning with a key. There's a filing cabinet in the barn office, he said, handing her the key. All the old records are in there. Cattle counts going back 5 years, supply receipts, everything I haven't thrown away. If you want to dig through it, be my guest. He paused. But be discreet. And if Darius asks what you're doing, you're looking for old recipes from Mrs. Calloway. Understood? Rowena took the key. Understood. She waited until after lunch. More beans, more hardtack, before making her way to the barn. The office was a cramped space partitioned off from the main area, barely big enough for a desk and the filing cabinet Caleb had mentioned. It smelled like leather and dust and mouse droppings. The cabinet was locked, but Caleb's key fit. Inside were stacks of papers going back years. Rowena pulled out the most recent cattle counts and started reading. The numbers told a story. 3 years ago, just like Caleb had said, the herd had been twice the size it was now. Over 600 head. Then it started dropping. First gradually, then more rapidly over the last year. The official explanations varied: predators, disease, natural attrition, but the rate of loss was too consistent to be natural. Someone was stealing cattle, not a few here and there, but systematically, over time. Enough that the losses blended into the background noise of running a ranch. Rowena pulled out more documents: supply receipts, wage records, repair logs. The pattern became clearer. Whenever there was a large cash withdrawal from the accounts, there was a corresponding drop in the herd count within a few weeks, as if someone was selling cattle on the side and pocketing the money. She was so absorbed in the papers that she didn't hear footsteps until the door opened behind her. Billy stood in the doorway, that same mocking grin on his face. "Well, well," he said. "What's the lady doing in here?" Rowena straightened, trying to keep her voice casual. "Looking for some old supply lists. Mr. Ashford thought there might be some preserves stored somewhere I could use." "Uh-huh." Billy leaned against the door frame. "Funny, 'cause it looks like you're going through the cattle records." "I was just curious about—" "Save it!" Billy's grin widened. "Darius said you'd probably come snooping around. Told me to keep an eye out." Rowena's stomach dropped. "I'm not snooping. Mr. Ashford gave me permission to look through these records." "Did he now? Wonder if he knew you'd be trying to make trouble for Darius." "I'm not trying to make trouble for anyone. I'm trying to understand—" Yeah, you're trying to help." Billy pushed off the doorframe. "Here's some free advice, lady. Stop trying. You're going to piss off the wrong person, and then those 12 days are going to feel real long." He walked away, whistling. Rowena's hands were shaking again as she gathered up the papers and shoved them back into the filing cabinet. She'd been caught. Billy would tell Darius, and Darius would— what? Confront Caleb? Confront her? She locked the cabinet and hurried back to the house, clutching the key like a lifeline. Caleb wasn't there. Neither was anyone else. The ranch had that mid-afternoon quiet, when all the men were out working and the sun beat down hard enough to make even thinking feel like effort. Rowena sat at the kitchen table and forced herself to breathe slowly. She'd found evidence, not proof, but strong evidence that Darius was stealing. The question was what to do with it. If she told Caleb now, he'd have to act. But acting meant confronting Darius before the drive, which could blow up the whole operation. If she waited until after the drive, Darius would have time to cover his tracks. Or worse, to disappear with whatever money the cattle brought in. There was no good option, just bad choices and worse ones. The door opened and Toby came in, his face pale. "Miss Rowena," he said, "Billy's telling everyone you were going through the cattle records. Says you're trying to get Darius in trouble." "I was looking for information, that's all." "Yeah, but—" Toby glanced over his shoulder. Darius is real mad. I heard him telling Frank that you need to be put in your place before you cause problems. What did Frank say? He told Darius to calm down. But I don't think Darius is going to listen. Toby twisted his hands together. Maybe you should just stop. Pretend you didn't find nothing. It's safer. Rowena looked at the boy, 12 years old, orphaned, working for room and board on a ranch that was falling apart around him. If she stopped digging, if she let Darius keep stealing, how long before there was no ranch left? How long before Toby had nowhere to go? I can't stop, she said quietly. Not now. Toby's face crumpled. Then you need to be real careful. Darius, he's not a good man, Miss Rowena. He hurt that horse, and he's hurt other things too. People don't talk about it, but I've seen things, heard things. What kind of things? But Toby just shook his head and ran out before she could press him. Rowena sat alone in the quiet kitchen, watching dust motes drift through the afternoon light, and tried to figure out how to survive the next 10 days. The careful thing would have been to wait, to watch and gather more evidence quietly, to avoid confrontation until she had something bulletproof to show Caleb. But careful had never been Rowena's strong suit, and the look on Toby's face when he'd run out had sealed it. Whatever Darius was doing, it was worse than just stealing money. She found Caleb in the corral, working with a young horse that kept shying away from the saddle blanket. He looked up when she approached, irritation crossing his face. I'm busy, he said. I know. This won't take long. Rowena glanced around. Frank was nearby, mending fence wire, but no one else was in earshot. I found something in those records. Already? You've been at it for 2 hours. It doesn't take long when the pattern's obvious. She kept her voice low. Your cattle numbers don't match the sales records. You're losing animals at 3 times the normal rate. And every time there's a big drop in the herd count, there's a cash withdrawal in the ledger marked operating expenses. Caleb's hands stilled on the rope. How many are we talking about? Over the last 18 months? Close to 100 head, maybe more. The number hung in the air between them. 100 head of cattle was thousands of dollars. Enough to keep a ranch afloat for years, or enough to ruin it if they disappeared. Could be predators, Caleb said, but his voice lacked conviction. Not at that rate. Not that consistently. Rowena pulled a folded paper from her apron pocket. She'd made notes in the barn, copying down the most damning numbers. Look, March of last year, you lose 12 head according to the count. Same month, Darius withdraws $300. May, 15 head gone, 400 withdrawn. It goes on like that month after month. Caleb took the paper, his jaw working as he read. The horse, sensing his distraction, wandered to the far side of the corral. This doesn't prove anything, he said finally. Could be coincidence. You don't believe that. What I believe doesn't matter. What I can prove matters. He handed the paper back. You got any idea how many cattle rustlers operate in this territory? How many drifters pass through looking for easy money? Even if someone's stealing from me, it might not be Darius. Then why won't he show you the receipts? Caleb's expression hardened. Because I've been writing him for 3 days about paperwork when he's got 100 other things to worry about. Because he's tired of being questioned by his boss and some woman who showed up out of nowhere. He turned back to the horse. I told you I'd handle it. I meant it. By waiting for him to produce records that don't exist? By giving him a chance to explain before I accuse my foreman of being a thief? Caleb's voice rose. You want me to blow up my whole operation based on some numbers that might mean nothing, right before the most important cattle drive I've ever run? Rowena felt heat rising in her face. I want you to open your eyes before he steals everything you have left. You've been here 4 days. 4. You think that makes you an expert on my ranch, my men, my problems? He stepped closer, and Rowena had to resist the urge to back up. I know you think you're helping, but you're not. You're making things harder. Fine. Rowena shoved the paper into his chest. Then I'll stop. I'll cook your meals and keep my mouth shut and leave in 8 days. And when this place falls apart, at least you can say nobody warned you. She turned and walked away before he could respond, her hands balled into fists. Behind her, she heard Frank's voice, low and calm. She's not wrong, boss. Stay out of it, Frank. I'm just saying, the numbers don't lie. Rowena didn't hear Caleb's response. She was already halfway to the house, angry tears pricking at her eyes. She blinked them back furiously. She would not cry. Not over this. Not over a man too stubborn to see what was right in front of him. The kitchen was still empty when she got back. She started pulling together what she'd need for supper, moving with sharp, jerky motions. More beans, some of the salvaged potatoes, a bit of salt pork if she rationed it carefully. The door opened behind her. She didn't turn around. If you're here to tell me I'm wrong again, save your breath. I'm not here to tell you you're wrong. It was Darius's voice. Rowena spun around. He was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, that same cold calculation in his eyes. I'm here to give you a choice, he said. A choice. Yeah. You can keep digging through records and making accusations, or you can pack your things tonight and let me arrange for someone to take you to town tomorrow. Either way, this ends. Rowena's heart was pounding, but she kept her voice steady. Mr. Ashford gave me 12 days. Mr. Ashford's not thinking clearly. Hasn't been for a long time. Darius pushed off the doorframe and walked into the kitchen, not threatening exactly, but deliberate, taking up space. See, the thing about Caleb is he's soft, always has been. Gives people second chances they don't deserve. Keeps dead weight around because he feels sorry for them. Like Toby? Like you. Darius smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You're a problem, Rowena, and I don't like problems. Then you should probably stop creating them. The smile vanished. Careful. Or what? You'll hit me like you hit that horse? Threaten me like you threatened the ranch hand who complained about short wages? Rowena took a step forward instead of back. I'm not afraid of you. You should be. Why? Because you're a bully? Because you've convinced Caleb you're indispensable while you steal from him? She was shaking now, but not from fear, from anger. I know what you're doing. I know about the cattle you've been selling on the side, about the money you've been siphoning off, and sooner or later Caleb's going to know it too. Darius's face went very still. When he spoke, his voice was soft, dangerous. You can't prove any of that. Not yet. But I will. No, you won't, because you're going to keep your mouth shut and mind your own business for the next 8 days. And then you're going to get on that stage and disappear, just like your daddy wanted. He leaned in close enough that she could smell tobacco on his breath. Because if you don't, accidents happen, especially to people who don't know how to handle themselves out here. Long way between here and town. Lots of places a woman could get lost or hurt. Rowena's blood went cold. You're threatening me. I'm giving you advice, free of charge. Darius straightened up. Think about it. 8 more days of peace and quiet, or 8 days of wondering when something bad's going to happen. Your choice. He walked out. Rowena stood frozen in the kitchen, her breath coming in short gasps. She'd been threatened before. Her father had a talent for it. The quiet kind of menace that never left bruises but made you feel small and worthless. But this was different. This was a man who'd already proven he was willing to hurt things weaker than him. The door banged open again and Rowena jumped, her hand going to the knife on the counter. But it was just Toby, his eyes wide and scared. I heard, he said. I was outside the window. I heard what Darius said. Rowena forced herself to breathe. It's all right. It's not all right. He threatened you. You got to tell Mr. Ashford. And say what? That his foreman made vague comments about accidents? Caleb already thinks I'm paranoid. But, Toby. Rowena knelt down so they were eye level. Listen to me. I need you to do something for me. Can you do that? The boy nodded. I need you to stay close to the house for the next few days. Don't go anywhere alone with Darius or Billy. And if you see anything that seems wrong, you come to tell me right away. Understand? You think Darius is going to hurt me? I think Darius is going to try to scare me off. And the best way to do that is to hurt someone I care about. She gripped his shoulders. So you stay safe. Promise me. I promise. Toby's voice was small. But what about you? I'll be fine. I've dealt with men like Darius before. That was a lie, but Toby didn't need to know that. Now go on, and remember, stay close. He ran out, and Rowena stood up, her knees protesting. Her hands were still shaking. She gripped the edge of the counter and made herself think. Darius had shown his hand. That meant she was close to something he couldn't afford to have exposed. But it also meant she was running out of time. If he was threatening her openly, he was either desperate or confident he could get away with it. Maybe both. She needed proof. Real proof, not just suspicious ledger entries and missing cattle. Something solid enough that even Caleb couldn't ignore it. The question was where to find it. Supper that night was tense. The men ate in silence, Darius sitting at Caleb's right hand like always, his expression neutral. But every time Rowena walked past to refill coffee or clear plates, she felt his eyes on her. Billy kept smirking. Frank looked worried. Caleb didn't look at anyone, just shoveled food into his mouth like it was a chore to get through. Only Toby met Rowena's eyes, and the fear she saw there made her stomach clench. After the men left, she cleaned up quickly and retreated to her small room. She wedged the door shut with a chair. It didn't have a lock, and sat on the edge of the cot, trying to think. The cattle drive was in 7 days. If Darius was planning to make a move, it would be before then. Get rid of the problem woman before she could cause real trouble. But how? An accident during the drive itself? Or something sooner? Something that would look natural? A knock on the door made her jump.
"It's Frank," a voice said. "Can I talk to you?" Rowena moved the chair and opened the door a crack. Frank stood there holding a kerosene lamp, his scarred face serious. "You all right?" he asked. "I'm fine." "That's bull. I saw how Darius was looking at you during supper, and I know he talked to you earlier." Frank glanced over his shoulder. "I don't know what he said, but I can guess. And I'm telling you now, don't underestimate him. Darius is smart and mean. Bad combination." "I know." "Do you? Because you're acting like someone who thinks they're going to win this fight. And I'm here to tell you, you won't. Not against Darius." Frank's voice was low and urgent. "Best thing you can do is exactly what he wants. Keep quiet, leave when your time's up, and don't look back." Rowena felt something in her chest tighten. "That's your advice? Run?" "That's my advice to stay alive. There's a difference." "What about Caleb? What about the ranch?" "Caleb's a grown man. He'll figure it out eventually. Or he won't. Either way, it's not your problem." "But Toby is a ranch hand. He'll find work somewhere else if this place folds." Frank shook his head. "I know you want to help. I respect that. But this ain't your fight, and you can't win it. So do yourself a favor and walk away while you still can." He left before she could argue. Rowena shut the door and sat back down on the cot. Frank was right about one thing. She couldn't win a straight fight against Darius. He had Caleb's trust, the loyalty of at least some of the men, and a willingness to hurt people who got in his way. But maybe she didn't need to win a straight fight. Maybe she just needed to be smarter than him. She lay down and stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. Somewhere in this ranch was evidence Darius couldn't explain away. Letters, receipts, something concrete. She just had to find it before he found a way to get rid of her. The next morning she woke to shouting. Rowena threw on her dress and ran out to the main room. Caleb was standing in the kitchen doorway, his face dark with fury. Darius and Billy were in the yard, along with Frank and 2 other ranch hands. "What's going on?" Rowena asked. Caleb turned to her. "Cattle. 40 head gone. Sometime in the night." Her stomach dropped. "Gone where?" "That's the question, isn't it?" Caleb grabbed his hat from the table. "Darius says rustlers. Says he found tracks heading south toward the Badlands." "And you believe him?" "I believe we just lost a chunk of our herd a week before the drive, which means we're short on the count we promised the buyers in Cheyenne." Caleb headed for the door. "I'm riding out with the men to see if we can track them. You stay here." "Caleb, wait." But he was already gone, the door slamming behind him. Rowena stood in the empty kitchen, her mind spinning. 40 head, gone overnight, right after Darius had threatened her. That couldn't be coincidence. This was a message, a demonstration of what he could do, what he could get away with. And if Caleb believed the rustler story, Darius would be clear again. No proof, no consequences. She was still standing there when Toby came running in, out of breath. "Miss Rowena, you gotta see something." "What?" "Out by the east pasture. I found something this morning when I was checking the fence line." He grabbed her hand. "Please. It's important." Rowena let him pull her outside and across the yard. The morning sun was already hot, promising another brutal day. They skirted the corral and headed toward the fence line that separated the ranch from open prairie. Toby led her to a section where the fence had been cut. Not broken, cut. Clean through, the wire ends lying in the dirt. "Rustlers don't usually bother with cutting fence," Toby said. "They just run the cattle through wherever.
But someone cut this real careful, like they wanted to make it look like the cows got out on their own. Rowena examined the cut ends. He was right. This had been deliberate. There's more, Toby said. He pointed at the ground. See those tracks? Leading away from the fence? Those are shod hooves, ranch horses. Not wild ones, not rustlers' horses, ranch horses.
Rowena's pulse quickened. You're sure? Yes, ma'am. I know our horses' shoes. Frank reshoes them himself, and he does this thing where he files the edge down special so they don't crack. Toby crouched down, tracing the hoof print with his finger. This is Rusty, Darius's horse. There it was. Proof. Not circumstantial, not suspicious ledger entries. Physical evidence that Darius had been here, had cut this fence, had driven those cattle off ranch land himself. Toby, Rowena said carefully, did you tell anyone else about this? Not yet. I came to find you first. Good. Don't tell anyone, not yet. But Mr. Ashford is out looking for rustlers that don't exist. If we tell him now, Darius will just say he was checking the fence line, found it already cut, and was investigating. Rowena stood up, thinking fast. We need more. We need to figure out where those cattle went. Toby looked uncertain. I ain't a tracker, Miss Rowena. Not good enough to follow a trail that far. Then we don't follow the trail. We think about where Darius would take them. She looked out across the prairie. Somewhere close enough to move them easily, but far enough that they wouldn't wander back. Somewhere he could hold them until he found a buyer. There's an old line shack about 5 miles south. Used to be part of this ranch before Mr. Ashford sold off some land. It's got a corral and everything. Could you take me there? Toby's eyes went wide. Now? The men are going to be gone for hours looking in the wrong direction. This might be our only chance. Rowena grabbed his shoulders. Can you saddle 2 horses without anyone noticing? I think so. But, Miss Rowena, if Darius is there, then we'll see the cattle and we'll come straight back. We won't confront him. We'll just get the proof we need and tell Caleb. She could see the fear on his face. I know it's scary, but if we don't do this, Darius is going to keep stealing, and this ranch is going to die. And then where will you go? Toby swallowed hard. Then he nodded. Okay, but we gotta be real careful. We will be. I promise. They walked back to the barn together, trying to look casual. Rowena's heart was hammering so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. This was reckless, stupid even, but it was also the only move she had left. Toby disappeared into the barn and came out 10 minutes later with 2 saddled horses, an old mare named Bess and a younger gelding Toby said was gentle. Rowena had ridden a handful of times in her life, all of them years ago, but she pulled herself up into the saddle and tried to look like she knew what she was doing. They rode out slowly, heading south away from the ranch. Once they were out of sight of the buildings, Toby kicked his horse into a faster pace, and Rowena did the same, gripping the saddle horn and trying not to fall off. The prairie stretched endlessly in every direction. Rowena had never felt so exposed, so visible. Anyone looking could see them. If Darius came back and found them gone. But they kept riding. The line shack appeared after about an hour, a sagging structure with a collapsed porch and broken windows. But the corral behind it was intact, and inside the corral were cattle. 40 head, maybe more. All of them wearing Ashford Ranch brands. Rowena pulled her horse to a stop, staring. There it was. Proof. Undeniable physical proof that Darius had stolen those cattle himself. We should go, Toby whispered. We got what we came for. But Rowena was looking past the corral to the shack itself. There was a horse tied outside, a big bay with distinctive white socks. Rusty, Darius's horse. Oh no, Toby breathed. The shack door opened and Darius stepped out. He looked at them for a long moment, then he smiled. Well, he said, this makes things easier. He started walking toward them. Rowena didn't think. She grabbed Toby's reins and kicked her horse hard. The mare bolted and Toby's gelding followed. Behind them she heard Darius shouting, heard the sound of him running for his horse. They rode hard across the prairie, the horse's hooves pounding the dry earth. Rowena had no idea if they were going the right direction. She just knew they had to get away, had to get back to the ranch before Darius caught up. But his horse was faster, fresher. She could hear him gaining on them. Split up, Toby yelled. He can't chase both of us.
No, stay together! But Toby was already veering east, his horse stretching out into a full gallop, and Darius, after a moment's hesitation, went after Rowena instead. She tried to make the old mare go faster, but the horse was blowing hard, foam on her neck. They weren't going to make it. Darius was going to catch her, and then the mare stumbled. Rowena went flying, hitting the ground hard enough to knock the air from her lungs. She rolled, gasping, and looked up to see Darius pulling his horse to a stop 20 feet away. He dismounted slowly, deliberately, walked toward her. Rowena scrambled to her feet, backing away. Caleb knows where I am. If I don't come back, Caleb's 10 miles from here chasing ghosts. By the time he gets back, you'll have had a terrible accident. Horse through you, hit your head on a rock. Tragic. Darius kept coming. Should have taken my advice and left while you had the chance. Rowena's hand closed on a rock. Not big enough to do real damage, but better than nothing. Don't, Darius said. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. She threw the rock anyway. It hit him in the shoulder and he barely flinched. Then he lunged. Rowena tried to run, but he was faster. His hand closed on her arm, yanking her back. She twisted, clawing at his face, and managed to rake her nails across his cheek hard enough to draw blood. Darius swore and shoved her. She went down hard, her head cracking against something solid. Stars burst across her vision. Through the haze, she heard hoofbeats. Multiple horses. Darius heard them too. He looked up, his face going pale. Then Caleb was there, bum, jumping off his horse before it had fully stopped, grabbing Darius by the front of his shirt and slamming him into the ground. What the hell are you doing? Caleb's voice was raw with fury. Darius tried to answer, but Caleb hit him. Once, twice, hard enough that Rowena heard something crack. Frank appeared, pulling Caleb back. Boss, stop! You'll kill him! He was going to hurt her. I know, but you gotta calm down. Frank looked at Rowena. You all right, miss? Rowena touched the back of her head and her fingers came away wet with blood. I think so. Toby pushed through the circle of men and dropped to his knees beside her. I got them. I rode as fast as I could, and I found Mr. Ashford, and I told him about the shack and the cattle, and he came right away. You did good, Rowena managed. You did real good. Caleb hauled Darius to his feet. The foreman's nose was bleeding, his lips split. The cattle, Rowena said. At the line shack, 40 head, all with your brand. Caleb looked at Darius. That true? Darius spat blood. You're taking her word over mine? Some woman you've known for 5 days? I'm taking evidence over excuses. Frank, Billy, ride to the line shack. If those cattle are there, drive them back to the ranch. Caleb's voice was cold. And Darius? You're done. Pack your things. If you're still on my land by sundown, I'll have you arrested. For what? Moving some cattle. For theft. For assault. For whatever else I can prove once I go through those ledgers properly. Caleb shoved him toward his horse. Get out of my sight. Darius mounted up, blood dripping from his chin. He looked at Rowena one last time. This isn't over, he said quietly. Then he rode away. Caleb made her ride his horse back. He walked alongside, leading the old mare, his hand on the stirrup like he was afraid she might fall off. Rowena's head throbbed with every step the horse took, and when she touched the back of her skull again, her fingers came away sticky. How bad is it? She asked. Bad enough. Frank's going to look at it when we get back. Caleb's jaw was tight. What the hell were you thinking, riding out there alone? I wasn't alone. Toby was with me. A 12-year-old boy. That's who you took for backup. He looked up at her, his eyes hard. You could have been killed. I found proof. That's what matters. Proof doesn't mean anything if you're dead. His voice cracked slightly. I should have listened to you sooner, should have seen what Darius was doing, but I was too damn stubborn, and you almost paid for it. Rowena didn't have an answer for that. Her head hurt too much to think straight, and the adrenaline was wearing off, leaving her shaky and cold despite the heat. When they reached the ranch, Frank was already waiting with water and clean rags. He took one look at Rowena's head and whistled low. You got knocked good. Let's get you inside. They helped her down from the horse and into the kitchen. Frank made her sit while he cleaned the wound, his scarred hands surprisingly gentle. It stung like hell, but she bit her lip and didn't make a sound. Gonna have a hell of a bump, Frank said. But the bleeding stopped. That's good. You feel dizzy? Sick to your stomach? A little dizzy. Then you need to rest. No arguments.
Frank looked at Caleb. She can't sleep for a few hours. Someone's got to keep an eye on her, make sure she doesn't get worse. I'll do it, Caleb said. You got a ranch to run and a cattle drive to figure out, now that your foreman just got himself fired. Frank stood up. I'll sit with her first. You go deal with getting those cattle back and making sure Darius actually leaves.
Caleb hesitated, then nodded. You see anything change? Anything at all? You come get me. Will do, boss. After Caleb left, Frank pulled up a chair and sat down heavily. He looked tired. Old. That was a damn fool thing you did, he said. I know. Could have gotten yourself and that boy killed. I know that too. Frank was quiet for a moment. But it took guts. I'll give you that. More guts than most men around here have shown. Rowena leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes. The throbbing in her head was getting worse. Is Toby all right? He's fine. Shaken up, but fine. Kid's tougher than he looks. Frank paused. He thinks you're some kind of hero. Rode out there to save the ranch, stood up to Darius, all that. I'm not a hero. I just didn't want to watch everything fall apart. Same thing sometimes. Rowena opened her eyes. What happens now? With Darius gone and the drive coming up? Frank sighed. That's the question, ain't it? Caleb's going to have to run the drive himself, which he can do. But it'll be harder without a foreman. And we're still short on men. 2 of the hands were loyal to Darius. They'll probably leave with him. Can you make it work with fewer men? Maybe, if nothing goes wrong. But things always go wrong on a drive. Frank stood up, checking the bandage on her head. You just worry about healing up. Let Caleb worry about the rest. But Rowena couldn't stop worrying. Even after Frank left and the afternoon light slanted through the kitchen windows, even as her head pounded and exhaustion pulled at her, her mind kept spinning. The drive was in 6 days. 40 head of cattle had been recovered, but how many more had Darius sold off over the months? How short were they on the count they'd promised the buyers? The door opened and Toby crept in, his face pale. Miss Rowena, you awake? Come here. He sat down next to her chair. Up close, she could see he'd been crying. His eyes were red and puffy. I'm sorry, he said. I'm so sorry. I should have gone faster, should have gotten help sooner. Toby, stop. Rowena reached out and took his hand. You did everything right. You found the evidence, you got Mr. Ashford, you saved me. None of this is your fault. But you got hurt. I've been hurt before. I'll be fine. She squeezed his hand. Thank you. For being brave. For trusting me. Toby wiped his eyes with his sleeve. Darius is really gone? He's not coming back? Mr. Ashford told him to leave. I don't think he'll risk coming back. Good. The boy's voice was fierce. I hope he never comes back. I hope something bad happens to him. Rowena understood the feeling, but she also knew that hoping for bad things to happen to people, even people who deserved it, had a way of eating at you from the inside. He's gone, she said instead. That's enough. Toby stayed with her for a while, not talking, just sitting. Eventually Frank came back and shooed him away to finish his chores. The sun moved across the sky. Rowena dozed in the chair, waking every time her head rolled to the side and pain lanced through her skull. When she opened her eyes again, it was evening and Caleb was sitting across from her. Hey, he said quietly. How you feeling? Like I got kicked by a horse. Frank said you're doing okay. No signs of anything serious. Caleb leaned forward, elbows on his knees. The cattle are back, all 40 head, and I went through the ledgers properly this time. Found records Darius had hidden, sales receipts for cattle that never made it into the books. He's been stealing from me for over a year, maybe longer. How much? Close to $3,000, best I can figure, plus whatever cattle I can't account for. Caleb's voice was flat. I was blind, completely blind. He was robbing me, and I just let it happen. You trusted him. That's not the same as being blind. Isn't it? Caleb looked at her. You saw it in 4 days. 4 days and you knew something was wrong. I've been living with it for a year and didn't see a damn thing. Rowena sat up straighter, ignoring the spike of pain. You want to know why I saw it? Because I had nothing to lose. I wasn't trying to hold on to what I had or protect what I'd built. I was just looking at the facts. She paused. You had something to lose. That makes you careful. sometimes too careful. Caleb was quiet for a long time. Outside, she could hear the men calling to each other as they settled the horses for the night. The ordinary sounds of a ranch that had just lost its foreman and was facing an uncertain future. "I owe you an apology," Caleb said finally, "for not listening sooner, for letting it get as bad as it did. For—" he stopped. "For almost getting you killed because I was too stubborn to see the truth." "You didn't almost get me killed. Darius did. And I'm the one who rode out there knowing it was risky." Rowena met his eyes. "We're both stubborn. We're both difficult. But we're also both still here, and the ranch is still standing. That counts for something." "Does it?" "I think so." Caleb stood up, running a hand through his hair. "The drive's in 6 days. I'm down a foreman and 2 ranch hands. The herd count's going to be lower than what I promised the buyers, which means less money. And I've got a woman with a head injury who should be resting, but probably won't." Despite everything, Rowena smiled. "You're right about that last part. I figured." He moved toward the door, then stopped. "Those 12 days I gave you, consider them canceled. You can stay as long as you need, longer if you want. This ranch owes you that much." He left before she could respond. Rowena sat alone in the darkening kitchen, her head throbbing, her body aching, and for the first time since she'd been thrown from that wagon, she felt something that might have been hope. The next 3 days were chaos. Caleb worked from before dawn until after dark, reorganizing everything Darius had managed. He promoted Frank to foreman, which Frank accepted with a grimace and a comment about being too old for this kind of responsibility. 2 of the ranch hands did leave with Darius, just like Frank had predicted. That left them with 6 men for a drive that really needed 8. Rowena, despite Frank's orders to rest, threw herself into preparing. If the men were going to be gone for 2 weeks driving cattle to Cheyenne and back, they'd need supplies. Food that would keep, medical supplies in case someone got hurt, everything organized and packed properly. She worked through the pantry systematically, making lists of what they had and what they needed. The list of what they needed was longer. "We can't afford half this stuff," Caleb said when she showed him. "Then we get creative. I can make hardtack that won't break teeth. I can cure more meat if you can spare a couple chickens. And I found some wild onions growing down by the creek. Not much, but better than nothing." Caleb looked at the list, then at her. "You know you don't have to do this. Frank can handle the supply prep." "Frank's got enough on his plate learning how to be a foreman in 3 days. Let me do this." "Your head is fine. The headaches are getting better, and I need to do something useful or I'm going to go crazy sitting around." He didn't argue after that. Rowena worked alongside the ranch cook who'd finally shown up after 3 weeks of absence, a widow named Mrs. Yates who took one look at the disaster of a kitchen and started swearing impressively. Together they baked enough hardtack to feed an army, cured meat, packed dried beans and coffee, and put together a medical kit that included bandages, alcohol for wounds, and a bottle of laudanum in case someone broke a bone. Toby shadowed Rowena whenever he could, helping carry supplies and asking questions about everything. He was supposed to stay at the ranch during the drive. Too young, Caleb said, and besides, someone needed to look after things while they were gone. The boy was disappointed but trying hard not to show it. On the 3rd day after Darius left, a stranger rode up to the ranch. Rowena saw her first from the kitchen window. A woman, maybe 23 or 24, sitting side saddle on a gray mare. She was wearing a traveling dress that had probably been expensive once but was now dusty from the road. Dark hair pinned up in an elaborate style, a face that would have been pretty if it wasn't pinched with what looked like fury. Rowena's stomach dropped. She knew that face. She'd lived with it for 29 years. Vivian. Caleb was in the barn when Vivian dismounted. By the time he came out, she was already standing in the yard, her riding crop in one hand, looking around with an expression of disdain. "You must be Mr. Ashford," she said. Her voice was high and clear, practiced. "I'm Vivian Mercer. I believe you were expecting me." Caleb stopped in his tracks. "I was expecting you 6 months ago." "Yes, well, there were complications. But I'm here now ready to fulfill our arrangement." Vivian smiled, and it was the smile she used when she wanted something. Rowena had seen it 1,000 times. "I hope my arrival isn't too much of an inconvenience." "Your arrival?" Caleb's voice was flat. "Lady, you're about half a year too late. I stopped expecting you when your sister showed up in your place." Vivian's smile faltered. "My sister? Rowena's here?" She is.
I see. Vivian's expression went cold. Well, that must have been a disappointment, but I'm here now, and surely you'd prefer the bride you actually wanted, rather than the one you got stuck with. Rowena had heard enough. She pushed open the kitchen door and walked out into the yard. Vivian's eyes widened. Rowena, what are you still doing here? I thought Father said you'd only be here temporarily.
Temporarily turned into permanently, or at least longer than 12 days. Rowena crossed her arms. What are you doing here, Vivian? I came to marry Mr. Ashford, of course, as was arranged. The arrangement was 6 months ago. You chose the banker's son, remember? Or did that fall through? Color rose in Vivian's cheeks. That's none of your concern. It is if you're here trying to take my place. Your place? Vivian laughed. You don't have a place here. You're just the substitute Father sent when I couldn't come. But now I'm here, and we can correct that mistake. Caleb held up a hand. Hold on. Nobody's correcting anything. Miss Vivian, I don't know what you think is happening here, but I'm not interested in marrying you. Or anyone else, for that matter. Vivian turned to him, her smile back in place. Surely you don't mean that. I know I'm late, but nothing. You're late. I've moved on, and your sister's earned her place here. That's the end of it. My sister? Vivian's voice rose. Mr. Ashford, you can't be serious. Rowena is... She's not suitable for a frontier ranch. She's too old, too plain, too... Careful, Caleb said quietly. You're talking about someone I respect. Someone who's done more for this ranch in a week than you could do in a year. Vivian's mouth opened and closed. She looked between Caleb and Rowena, her face mottling with anger and embarrassment. This is ridiculous, she said finally. I came all this way. I have a contract, letters proving our arrangement, which you broke when you didn't show up 6 months ago. Caleb's voice was firm. I'm sorry you made the trip for nothing, but there's nothing here for you. Best you head back to town and catch the next stage home. I don't have money for passage home. I spent everything I had getting here. Of course she did. Rowena closed her eyes briefly. Vivian had always been terrible with money, always assuming someone else would bail her out. Why did you really come? Rowena asked. The banker's son didn't work out, did he? So you thought you'd fall back on your backup plan. Vivian's face crumpled. For just a moment she looked young and scared and lost. He called off the engagement, said I was too expensive to maintain. Father was furious. He said he was done supporting me, that I'd made my choice and now I had to live with it. So you came here. Where else was I supposed to go? Vivian's voice broke. I have nothing, no money, no prospects, no husband. I thought at least here I could take what I'd built, slide into the role you abandoned, and pretend nothing happened. Rowena shook her head. That's not how this works, Vivian. You always hated me, always resented me for being younger and prettier. I never hated you. I pitied you, because you never learned that being pretty isn't enough, that eventually you have to actually be worth something beyond your face. Vivian flinched like she'd been slapped. Caleb looked between the two sisters, his expression unreadable. Miss Vivian, I can give you a place to sleep tonight and breakfast in the morning. After that, you'll need to figure something else out. I'm not marrying you and I'm not supporting you. That clear? Vivian nodded mutely. Good. Rowena, can you show her where to wash up? We'll sort out sleeping arrangements later. He walked away, leaving the two sisters standing in the yard. Rowena gestured toward the house. Come on, you look like you're about to fall over. Vivian followed her inside, moving like someone in a daze. In the kitchen, Rowena poured water from the pitcher and pushed it across the table. Drink. Vivian drank. Her hands were shaking. How long have you been traveling? Rowena asked. 4 days. The stage broke down twice. I had to sell my jewelry to pay for the last leg of the journey. Vivian looked up, and her eyes were wet. I didn't know where else to go. I thought maybe you'd help me. Help you steal my place? It was supposed to be my place. I was the one who was supposed to marry Mr. Ashford, not you. Rowena sat down across from her sister. And you gave it up. You chose Philadelphia and the banker's son and everything you thought you wanted more. That's not my fault. I know. Vivian's voice was small. I know it's not your fault, but you're my sister. Doesn't that count for something? It counts.
But I'm not giving up what I've built here just so you can slide in and pretend you didn't make a mistake. Rowena paused. You want help? Fine. You can stay tonight. Tomorrow we'll figure out what you're actually good at and see if there's work for you somewhere. But you're not marrying Caleb, and you're not taking my place. Vivian stared at her. You've changed. I had to. Turns out being thrown away teaches you to value yourself.
They sat in silence for a moment. Then Vivian spoke, her voice barely a whisper.
I'm sorry for everything. For being father's favorite. For making you feel like you didn't matter. She stopped. For not standing up for you when he sent you away. Rowena felt something tight in her chest loosened slightly. Not forgiveness exactly, but maybe the beginning of it. What happened with the banker's son? She asked.
I spent too much on dresses, on parties, trying to be the wife he wanted. But it was never enough. He wanted someone decorative but cheap, and I was only the first part. Vivian laughed bitterly. Turns out I'm not actually good at anything except looking pretty, and that's not worth as much as I thought. You could learn to be good at something, I mean. Like what? I don't know yet, but you're not stupid, Vivian, just spoiled. That can be fixed if you're willing to work at it. Vivian looked at her with something like wonder. Why are you being kind to me? After everything? Because you're my sister, and because I know what it's like to have nowhere to go. Rowena stood up. Now come on, let's get you settled before the men come in for supper. She showed Vivian to the small storage room where she'd been sleeping and gave her sister the cot while she figured out other arrangements. Vivian collapsed onto it fully dressed and was asleep in seconds. Rowena stood in the doorway, looking at her sister's face, so familiar, so different from her own. Pretty, where Rowena was plain. Delicate, where Rowena was solid. The one their father had favored, had protected, had eventually thrown away when she became too expensive. They were both unwanted daughters now, both trying to survive in a world that had no use for women who couldn't fit neatly into the roles assigned to them. Maybe they had more in common than Rowena had thought. She closed the door quietly and went back to the kitchen to start preparing supper. Frank found her there an hour later, up to her elbows in bread dough. Heard we got a visitor, he said. My sister, she'll be gone tomorrow. Will she? Frank leaned against the doorframe. Because from what I heard, she's got no money and nowhere to go. That usually means people stick around. We'll figure something out. Uh-huh. Frank watched her knead the dough with more force than necessary. You all right? I'm fine. That's bull, but I'll let it slide. He paused. For what it's worth, Caleb ain't interested in her. Made that real clear. I know. Do you? Because you look like you're trying to punch that dough to death. Rowena stopped kneading and looked down at her hands. They were covered in flour and shaking slightly. She was supposed to have everything, she said quietly. The husband, the home, the life. And I was supposed to be the spinster aunt who helped raise her children and was grateful for the scraps. But now she's here, and she's desperate, and part of me wants to help her, and part of me wants to throw her out and watch her fail. That's human. It's cruel. Being human usually is. Frank straightened up. Look, I don't know your sister, and I don't much care about her problems. But I know you, and you're not the kind of person who can watch someone suffer and not help, even if they deserve it a little. So you'll figure out what to do with her, and whatever you decide, it'll be the right call. He left her alone with the bread dough and her thoughts. That evening, Vivian came to supper looking pale and subdued. The men stared at her. She was beautiful, even exhausted and dusty. But nobody spoke to her. They ate quickly and left, clearly uncomfortable with the tension. After they were gone, Vivian helped Rowena clean up without being asked. They worked in silence, the only sound the clink of dishes and the splash of water. I meant what I said earlier, Vivian said finally. About being sorry. I know. Do you forgive me? Rowena dried a plate carefully. I don't know yet. Ask me again in a few weeks. Can I stay that long? If you work, if you pull your weight and don't cause trouble. Rowena looked at her sister. But the minute you try to undermine me or take what's mine, you're gone. Clear? Clear. They finished the dishes. Vivian went back to the storage room, and Rowena made herself a bed on the floor of the main room using spare blankets. It wasn't comfortable, but it was better than nothing. She lay awake long into the night, staring at the ceiling beams and trying to figure out how her life had gotten so complicated. 6 days ago, she'd been the unwanted sister with nowhere to go. Now she was the woman holding a struggling ranch together, while the owner prepared for a desperate cattle drive. She had a foreman who trusted her, a boy who looked up to her, and a man who'd started looking at her like she mattered. And now her beautiful younger sister had shown up, desperate and broke, asking for help. Rowena didn't know whether to laugh or cry. In the end, she did neither. She just closed her eyes and tried to sleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring new problems, and she'd have to face them whether she was ready or not. The cattle drive was 4 days away. After that, everything would change again. She just had to hold on until then. The morning the men left for the cattle drive, Vivian was up before dawn helping Rowena pack the last of the supplies. She moved clumsily, unused to physical work, but she didn't complain. That counted for something. Caleb came into the kitchen as they were tying down the final bundles. He looked exhausted already, and they hadn't even started yet. "Everything ready?" he asked.
As ready as it's going to be. Rowena handed him a canvas bag. Medical supplies. Don't let the men ignore injuries. A small cut out there can turn into blood poisoning real fast. I know. And the hardtack's in the blue tin. It'll keep the whole trip. The jerky's wrapped separately. Don't let it get wet or it'll spoil. Rowena. Caleb put a hand on her shoulder. I've done this before. We'll be fine.
But his eyes said he wasn't sure. None of them were. 6 men to move nearly 300 head of cattle across rough territory to Cheyenne and back. No foreman. A herd count that was still lower than what they'd promised the buyers, which meant renegotiating prices on the fly. Everything had to go right, and things never went right. "How long?" Rowena asked. 2 weeks if we're lucky, 3 if we run into trouble. Caleb glanced toward the door where Frank was shouting orders at the other men. "You'll be all right here? You and your sister and Toby? We'll manage. If Darius comes back, he won't. And if he does, I've got the shotgun you showed me how to load." Rowena met his eyes. "Go. Make the sale. Save the ranch. We'll hold down the fort." Caleb looked like he wanted to say something else. His hand was still on her shoulder, warm and heavy. Then Frank called his name, and the moment passed. 2 weeks, he said. 2 weeks. He left. Rowena stood in the doorway and watched them drive the cattle out, the dust rising in great clouds as 300 head of beef moved like a slow brown river toward the horizon. Toby stood next to her, trying not to cry. He'd wanted desperately to go, but Caleb had been firm. Someone had to stay behind, and Toby was it. When the last of the dust had settled and the ranch yard was quiet, Vivian spoke from behind them. "Now what?" Rowena turned to look at her sister. Vivian's hair was coming loose from its pins, her expensive dress already stained with dirt and flour. She looked lost. "Now we work," Rowena said. "This ranch doesn't run itself." The first few days were hard. Vivian had never done manual labor in her life, and it showed. She couldn't milk the cow without spilling half the bucket. She burned the first batch of bread she tried to make. She managed to lock herself in the chicken coop and had to be rescued by Toby, who'd laughed so hard he'd nearly fallen over. But she kept trying. That was the thing Rowena hadn't expected. Vivian kept getting up before dawn, kept attempting tasks she had no skill for, kept asking questions, and accepting criticism without the tears and dramatics Rowena had grown used to. On the third day, Rowena found her in the garden, a scraggly patch behind the house that had been neglected for months, pulling weeds with bleeding hands. "You don't have to do that," Rowena said. "I know, but I want to." Vivian sat back on her heels, pushing hair out of her face and leaving a streak of dirt across her forehead. "I've been thinking about what you said, about being good at something, and I'm not good at anything yet, but maybe I could be good at this." "Gardening?" "Growing things. Making them survive." Vivian looked down at her hands. "I killed everything Father ever gave me to care for. Plants, pets, even goldfish. I always thought it was because I was careless, but maybe I just never had a reason to try." Rowena sat down next to her sister in the dirt. The sun was hot on their backs, and the weeds were thick and stubborn, but there was something peaceful about it. "You want a reason?" she asked. "Yes." "Then here's one. If those men don't come back with enough money to keep this ranch going, we're going to need to grow our own food. Every vegetable we can raise is money saved. Every chicken that lays eggs is one less thing we have to buy. You make this garden produce, you'll have earned your keep and then some. Vivian's eyes widened. You think they might not make enough? I think it's possible. The herd count's lower than expected. If the buyers push back on price, or if something goes wrong on the drive. Rowena didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Then what happens to us? We figure it out, same as we've been doing. Vivian was quiet for a moment. Then she started pulling weeds again, more deliberately this time. They worked together until the sun was high, and Rowena's back ached. When they went inside, Vivian's hands were raw and blistered, but she didn't complain. She just washed them carefully and wrapped them in clean rags. That night, after Toby had gone to bed in the bunkhouse and the ranch was dark and quiet, the sisters sat on the porch drinking weak coffee. Can I ask you something? Vivian said. Go ahead. Do you love him, Mr. Ashford? Rowena was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, maybe, but it doesn't matter. Why not? Because love isn't enough out here. You need more than feelings to survive. You need partnership, trust, respect. She looked at her sister. You loved that banker's son? I thought I did, but I think I just loved the idea of him, the life he represented. Vivian pulled her shawl tighter. With you and Mr. Ashford, it's different. You look at each other like you're on the same team, like you're fighting the same fight. We are. That's what I want, someday. Vivian's voice was soft. Not someone who wants me because I'm pretty. Someone who wants me because I'm useful, because I matter. Rowena reached over and squeezed her sister's hand. You'll find it, but first you have to figure out who you are when nobody's watching, when nobody's telling you what to be. How do I do that? You just did. You spent all day pulling weeds nobody asked you to pull because you wanted to do something that mattered. That's a start. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out over the prairie. The next morning, a rider came. Rowena saw him from the kitchen window, a man on a lathered horse riding hard. Her stomach dropped. A rider coming back this soon couldn't mean anything good. She ran out to meet him. It was one of the ranch hands, a quiet man named Peters. He slid off his horse and nearly collapsed. Water, he gasped. Toby was already running with a dipper. Peters drank deeply, then looked at Rowena. We got trouble. Bad trouble. What happened? Stampede. Second night out. Lost maybe 30 head, and Mr. Ashford thinks some were rustled during the chaos. We're even shorter on the count now. Peters wiped his mouth. But that's not the worst of it. Rowena's chest tightened. What's the worst of it? Toby Reed's missing. The world tilted. Rowena grabbed the porch rail to steady herself. What? The boy who was supposed to stay here. We found a note in the supply wagon. He must have snuck in before we left. Said he wanted to help with the drive. We didn't even know he was there until the stampede, and then... Peter shook his head. He got thrown from a horse trying to turn the herd. We searched for hours but couldn't find him. Mr. Ashford sent me back to get fresh horses and more men to search. Beside Rowena, the real Toby spoke up, his voice small and confused. But I'm right here. Peter stared at him. You didn't go with us. No, sir. I've been here the whole time. Understanding crashed over Rowena like cold water. There was another boy, someone pretending to be Toby. Who else would... But she already knew. Darius, she breathed. Peters's face went pale. Darius is gone. Mr. Ashford fired him. And he wanted revenge. What better way than to sabotage the drive? Rowena's mind was racing. He could have hidden in the supply wagon, caused the stampede, stolen cattle during the confusion. And now you're wasting time looking for a boy who doesn't exist while he gets away with stolen cattle and Caleb's short on the count. But the note said, the note was a diversion, to make you search instead of moving forward with the drive. Rowena turned to Vivian. How many fresh horses do we have? 3, maybe 4. Saddle them. Peters, you're going back with a message. Tell Caleb to stop searching and get those cattle to market. Tell him Darius was behind it, and if he moves fast, he might catch him. Miss Rowena, I can't just... Yes, you can, because every hour you waste searching for a boy who's safe at home is an hour Darius gets further away with stolen cattle. She gripped his arm. Trust me, I've been right about Darius before.
Peters hesitated, then nodded. All right, I'll tell him. Good. Vivian will get the horses ready. You rest for 20 minutes, then ride hard. And Peters? She waited until he met her eyes. Tell Caleb we're fine. Tell him not to worry about us. After Peters left, Rowena stood in the yard trying to think. Darius had been planning this. The stampede wasn't random. It was calculated. Steal cattle during the chaos, plant a false trail, waste time and resources while he escaped. But where would he take the cattle? He couldn't sell them locally. Too risky. He'd need to drive them somewhere far enough away that nobody would ask questions. Mexico, maybe, or one of the mining towns where stolen cattle were common currency. The Badlands. That's where he'd go first. The same area where he'd hidden the 40 head. Remote, hard to track, plenty of places to hold cattle temporarily. Rowena made a decision. Toby, she said, can you handle the ranch for a few days? The boy's eyes went wide. By myself? You and Vivian, between the two of you, you can manage the basics, feed the animals, collect eggs, keep things running. Where are you going? To do something stupid. Rowena looked at her sister. Vivian, I need you to be honest. Can you do this? Can you keep this place going if I'm not here? Vivian straightened her shoulders. Yes, I can do it. You're sure? No, but I'll do it anyway. Vivian grabbed Rowena's hand. What are you planning? I'm going after Darius. Are you insane? He tried to kill you once already. I know, but I also know where he's probably hiding those cattle. And if I can get proof, real proof, and get word to Caleb, they might be able to recover enough head to make the sale. Rowena pulled away gently. I have to try. Then I'm coming with you. No, I need you here. This ranch needs someone who gives a damn about it, and right now that's you. Vivian's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. Be careful, please. Rowena packed light. Water, dried meat, a knife, the shotgun. She saddled the steadiest horse, an old gelding named Buck, who wouldn't spook easily. Then she rode out before she could change her mind. The line shack was a day's ride south. Rowena pushed Buck as hard as she dared, stopping only to rest him and check her direction. The prairie stretched endless and empty, the sun beating down mercilessly. She reached the shack just before sunset on the second day. From a distance, she could see smoke rising from the chimney. Someone was there. Rowena left Buck tied a quarter-mile away and crept closer on foot. The corral behind the shack held cattle, maybe 20 head, all wearing Ashford brands. And standing by the corral, rolling a cigarette, was Darius. He wasn't alone. 2 other men were with him, rough-looking types who were clearly hired help. They were discussing something, voices carrying in the still evening air. Move them tomorrow night. Got a buyer waiting in Laramie. Cash, no questions. What about Ashford's drive? Won't they come looking? Darius laughed. They're too busy searching for a kid who ain't there. By the time they figure it out, we'll be long gone. Rowena had heard enough. She crept back to Buck and rode hard for the nearest town, a dusty collection of buildings about 10 miles east. She found the sheriff's office just as the sun was setting. The sheriff was a gray-haired man with a belly that hung over his belt. He listened to her story with skeptical eyes. You're telling me Darius Crow is rustling cattle from the Ashford Ranch? I'm telling you, he's at the old line shack right now with 20 head of stolen cattle and plans to sell them tomorrow night in Laramie. And you know this how? Because I heard him say it. The sheriff leaned back in his chair. Lady, I've known Darius for 3 years. He's a hard man, but he ain't a thief. He is, and I can prove it if you'll just ride out there with me. I ain't riding anywhere on the word of some woman I never met. The sheriff waved her off. You want me to investigate? Bring me real evidence, not just stories. Rowena felt frustration rising in her throat. By the time I get evidence, he'll be gone. I don't have to do anything. Now, if you'll excuse me, I got better things to do than chase phantom rustlers. He turned away, dismissing her. Rowena left the sheriff's office with her hands shaking. She'd been so sure he'd help, so sure that proof of Darius's theft would be enough. But she should have known better. Nobody listened to women out here, especially women with no money, no husband, no power. She stood in the dusty street as the sun set and tried to think. She couldn't catch Darius herself. He had men with him, guns, experience. She couldn't get help from the law. And she couldn't get word to Caleb in time. She was out of options. Or was she?
Rowena mounted Buck and rode back toward the line shack. This time she didn't stop a quarter mile away. She rode straight up to the corral, the shotgun across her lap. Darius looked up from the fire, his face registering surprise, and then something colder. "Well," he said, "you got a death wish coming back here alone." "I'm not alone. The sheriff knows you're here. I told him everything." It was a lie, but Darius didn't know that. His eyes narrowed. "You're bluffing." "Am I? You want to risk it?" Rowena kept the shotgun pointed at him. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to drive those cattle back to Ashford Land. You're going to leave them there, and then you're going to disappear and never come back." Darius laughed. "Or what? You'll shoot me? You ain't got the guts." "Maybe not, but I've got nothing to lose. You took my place on that ranch, threatened people I care about, and tried to ruin a man who gave you a job when nobody else would." Rowena's hands were steady on the gun. "So yeah, I'll shoot you if I have to." One of the hired men shifted nervously. "Darius, maybe we should just—" "Shut up." Darius's eyes never left Rowena's face. "You really think you're walking out of here, you and that old shotgun against 3 men? I think if you kill me, the sheriff will know exactly where to look. I left him a letter explaining everything. If I don't come back, he'll ride out here with a posse." Another lie. But her voice didn't waver. "So you can kill me and hang for murder, or you can let me go and take your chances running. Your choice." The silence stretched. The hired men were looking at Darius, waiting for orders. Rowena kept the gun steady, her heart hammering so loud she was sure they could hear it. Then Darius spat into the fire. "You're crazier than I thought." "Probably, but I'm still here, and you're still deciding whether it's worth dying over 20 head of cattle." Darius stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned to his men. "Mount up. We're leaving." "What about the cattle?" "Leave them. Ain't worth dying over." The men moved fast, saddling horses and packing gear. Within 15 minutes they were gone, riding hard toward the west. Rowena waited until they were out of sight. Then she lowered the shotgun and let out a breath she'd been holding for what felt like hours. Her hands started shaking so badly she nearly dropped the gun. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. Bluffed her way through a confrontation with a man who'd tried to kill her and survived. Now she just had to get the cattle back where they belonged. She spent the night at the line shack, too exhausted to ride back. In the morning, she drove the cattle north toward Ashford Land. It took all day, moving slow, stopping to rest the animals and herself. But by evening, she had them in the east pasture, the fence repaired with wire she'd found in the shack. When she rode into the ranch yard, Vivian ran out to meet her. "Thank goodness, we've been worried sick." Vivian grabbed Buck's reins. "Did you find him? Darius?" "I found him. He's gone. And I brought back 20 head of cattle." Rowena slid off the horse, her legs nearly buckling. "How's everything here?" "Fine. Good, actually. I managed the chickens without locking myself in, and Toby showed me how to fix the pump when it stuck." Vivian grinned. "I'm practically a rancher now." Despite her exhaustion, Rowena smiled. Practically. They walked into the house together, and for the first time since she'd arrived at the Ashford Ranch, Rowena felt something that might have been peace. 2 weeks later, Caleb rode back with the men and a wagon full of money. The sale had gone through. Not for the full price they'd hoped. The short count had cost them. But enough to pay the debts, keep the ranch running, and have a little left over. He found Rowena in the kitchen, where she'd spent the morning baking bread with Vivian. He looked thinner, worn down by the drive, but his eyes were clear. "You did it," he said. "So did you. Peters told me what you figured out, about Darius hiding in the wagon, causing the stampede." Caleb sat down heavily. "If you hadn't sent word, we'd have wasted days searching. Might have lost the sale entirely." "I just connected the pieces." "You did more than that. Peters also told me you rode out to the line shack alone, confronted Darius by yourself." His voice went rough. "That was the stupidest, bravest thing I've ever heard." "It worked, didn't it?" "This time. Don't do it again." Rowena smiled. "I'll try not to." Caleb looked around the kitchen, clean, organized, running smoothly. Then he looked at Vivian, who was kneading dough with flour-covered hands, and actually seemed to know what she was doing. "Things changed while I was gone," he said. "Things change everywhere, all the time. You just have to decide if you're changing with them or getting left behind." Rowena wiped her hands on her apron. "Come on. You look like you haven't eaten a real meal in weeks. Let me feed you."
Over dinner, Caleb told them about the drive, the stampede, the hard days, the tense negotiations in Cheyenne. Frank added details, making the men laugh with stories about greenhorn mistakes and close calls. It felt like family, like something worth fighting for. After the meal, Caleb asked Rowena to walk with him. They went out to the porch, watching the sun set over the prairie. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what happens next." "And?" "And I want you to stay, not as temporary help, not as the woman we got stuck with. As," he paused, "as my partner, in this ranch, in everything." Rowena's heart was pounding. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" "Depends. You think I'm asking you to marry me?" "Are you?" Caleb turned to face her. "Not yet." Rowena blinked. "What?" "I'm asking if you want to, someday, when we're both ready, when it's not about necessity or gratitude or keeping the ranch afloat, when it's just because we want to." He took her hand. "You told your sister that love isn't enough out here. You were right. But partnership is, and we've got that. So I'm asking if you want to build on it, see where it goes." Rowena looked at him, this stubborn, difficult man who'd given her a chance when nobody else would, who'd listened when it mattered, who'd learned to trust her judgment even when it went against his own. "Yes," she said, "I want that." "Good." He squeezed her hand. "No rush. We've got time." "How much time?" "However long it takes." They stood together in the fading light, and for once Rowena wasn't thinking about the past or worrying about the future. She was just here, now, with a man who saw her for who she was and wanted her anyway. The months that followed were hard work. They rebuilt the ranch slowly, carefully, making sure every decision was sound. Caleb taught Rowena about cattle management and land rotation. She taught him about accounting and long-term planning. They argued often, both too stubborn to back down easily, but they learned to fight fair and apologize when they were wrong. Vivian stayed. She took over the garden and expanded it, proving to have an unexpected talent for coaxing things to grow in hostile soil. She started keeping bees, selling honey in town. She wasn't pretty anymore. The sun had weathered her skin and hard work had roughed her hands, but she was useful, valued, and that turned out to matter more than being decorative ever had. Toby grew taller, stronger, more confident. Caleb started teaching him the business side of ranching, preparing him to run his own place someday. And Rowena became something she'd never expected to be. Essential. Not because she was needed in a crisis, but because the ranch ran better with her there. Because she'd earned her place through sweat and stubbornness and refusing to quit. On an autumn day, almost a year after she'd been thrown from that wagon, Caleb asked her again. They were sitting on the porch after a long day, watching the cattle graze in the distance. The ranch was profitable now. The debts were paid. The future looked possible instead of desperate. "Rowena Mercer," he said, "will you marry me?" She didn't answer right away. She looked out at the land she'd helped save, the home she'd helped build, the life she'd fought for when everyone said it was impossible. "On one condition," she said. "Name it. We make this ranch more than just ours. We make it a place for people like us, like Vivian and Toby. People who got thrown away or ran out of options. We give them a chance to prove they're worth something." Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled. "Deal." "Then yes, I'll marry you." They married in the spring, in the ranch yard with everyone who mattered watching. Frank gave her away. Vivian stood beside her, tears running down her sunburned face. Toby held the rings with shaking hands and only dropped them once. It wasn't fancy. There was no white dress or expensive feast, just a simple ceremony and a meal shared with people who'd become family, not by blood, but by choice. Afterward, someone asked Rowena if she'd ever imagined her life turning out like this. "No," she said honestly. "I imagined being invisible, being forgotten, being nothing. And now? Now I'm the woman who saved a ranch, who stood up to a bully, who proved that being unwanted doesn't mean being worthless." She looked at Caleb, at Vivian, at Toby, at the rough but good people who'd become her family. "Now I'm someone who matters. And that's more than I ever thought I'd have." The ranch grew over the years. They took in drifters who needed work, women escaping bad situations,
children with nowhere to go. Some stayed, some moved on. But everyone who came through the Ashford Ranch left knowing they'd been seen, valued, given a chance. The townspeople started calling it something different than just the Ashford Ranch. They called it the Second Chance Ranch, the place where people who'd been counted out got to start over. But Rowena had a different name for it, one she never said out loud but thought often. Home. Because that's what it had become. Not a place she'd been sent to disappear, but a place she'd fought to claim. Not the life someone else had chosen for her, but the one she'd built with her own scarred hands. She was Rowena Ashford now. The woman who'd arrived unwanted and unloved, who'd faced down theft and violence and her own sister's betrayal, who'd ridden into danger when common sense said to run. The woman who'd refused to disappear. And every morning when she woke up in the house she'd helped save, next to the man she'd chosen to love, she remembered what she'd learned in those first desperate days on the Wyoming prairie. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you is the best thing that could have happened. Sometimes being thrown away is the first step toward finding where you actually belong. And sometimes the people who underestimate you give you the greatest gift of all, the chance to prove them wrong. Rowena had been the wrong bride in a dying land, but she'd become exactly the right woman for the life she'd built, and that made all the difference.